Good evening. I would like to call the Board of Finance budget public hearing for Tuesday, March 5th, 2019 to order. First and foremost, I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. The audience is composed of members of both boards, Board of Education, Board of Selectmen, many commission members, commission chairs, department heads, and of course the community. And this is an incredibly important meeting for the community. And tonight, we're going to make this all about you, as we typically should. As you probably know, the Board of Finance since November has been meeting with the Board of Ed. We've been meeting in workshops on capital and department requests with the Board of Selectmen. Those were in January and in November. And we had a presentation, and actually both presentations you're about to hear tonight were made at our regular meeting on February 14th. Some of you, I'm sure, weren't able to make it because you had other plans. That would be acceptable. It was February 14th, after all. We have seen a lot of these numbers. We've seen the budgets. We've seen a lot of what you're about to hear tonight. But the presentations hopefully will tonight inform many of us and educate us on, hopefully, the numbers in these budgets and where we're going to be at when we go into discussions and deliberations on Thursday night at our workshop. These presentations hopefully will be showing increases, decreases, investments, maintenance in budget line items, maybe in some cases fact versus fiction. That's all fine, but hopefully you will all be much more informed after tonight. What I wanted to do is provide a bit of a format and let you all know how this will all take place tonight with our meeting. We will begin with a presentation of the proposed Board of Education budget. This will be done by Superintendent Paul Freeman and Chairman Bill Bloss, and they will begin the presentation. We will then request questions of the Board of Ed by the public. We would ask that you would come up to the podium if you have a question, name and address for the record, of course, and we will entertain questions at that time of the Board of Ed. And then I would ask that the Board of Finance also ask questions, but in our case, maybe burning questions, quote unquote. We're going to have plenty of time to ask questions and discuss on Thursday, so we want to make sure there's plenty of time for the public to ask their questions. If no one comes up, then maybe we have a little bit more time to ask some of those questions. From that point, we will go to a presentation of the proposed town budget, and that will be done by First Selectman Matt Hoey. We will follow the same format. After the presentation, questions by the public, questions by the Board of Finance members. After those presentations, questions are all set and completed. I will provide a recap of the presentations and the numbers you have heard, and basically I will be setting the stage for Thursday. We will not be necessarily discussing or deliberating amongst ourselves. That's really for the workshop on Thursday night. Tonight is about listening to the presentations and making sure you and we are all better informed on the budgets. And I will also very briefly mention what would be included in bonding questions also for the referendum. We will then close with public forum, and anybody wishing to come up and address the Board of Finance in public forum will then be allowed to do so, and then we will adjourn. And then we will meet again on Thursday, March 7th, same time, same place, same people. With that, I don't know if we have any other questions, but I would like to call up Superintendent Paul Freeman and Chairman Bill Bloss to provide the presentation for the Board of Education this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. I'm going to begin the presentation for the Board of Education this evening. What I will do is take you through the budget as it has been approved by the Board of Education and then turn the presentation over to Mr. Bloss. As I begin, I do just want to remind the community that every year, as we begin approaching the budget conversation, we begin by revisiting the vision and the mission that we have for our schools here in Guilford. That is the starting point every year as we begin the work on the budget. Additionally, each year we look to the annual priorities as established by the Board of Education. This year, we began with these 3 priorities: that our schools be physically and emotionally safe, healthy, and caring places for learning, that teaching and learning be supported by instructionally focused leadership, subject area coaches and specialists, professional learning communities and instructional resources, and finally, that all students will engage in academically rigorous tasks in every class. We begin with the safe and supportive environment, and we build down, we drill down into a rigorous classroom environment. Underneath those 3 priorities this year, there are a set of specific initiatives that we work on. And as we begin the budget process itself, we begin with a series of budget assumptions. At every decision that we make, that every dollar we allocate needs to meet these criteria. That first, it leads towards that safe and healthy environment. That second, it maintains a focus on instruction and learning. Third, that we never intend to stay still, but always to improve. And finally, that we will not ask for a single new dollar before examining all of the resources that we have currently at our disposal. We intend to be creative and resourceful with every dollar that we have before asking for any additional investment. And then we look at enrollment. We only budget for the students that we see in front of us every year. This year, we are projecting a decrease of approximately 60 students year over year. And when you spread 60 students across 7 locations and 13 grade levels, we would suggest that that actually leaves the enrollment fairly flat. To look at what that looks like, some years ago, we engaged, we solicited an outside demographic study. We know that many school districts around the state of Connecticut are experiencing significant enrollment decline. The demographic study that we engaged in some years ago projected the same dramatic enrollment decline for us in Guilford, and that's indicated by the darker line that you see there. The lighter green line, however, shows our actual enrollment. We are not seeing enrollment in the Guilford Public Schools decreasing at the rate that it is declining in other surrounding communities or in other like communities spread across the state. So while we are experiencing decline, it is a slower and more gradual decline than other communities are experiencing. And what that leads us to is a budget request this year of $60,675,831. That's an increase over the current fiscal year of $1,178,656, or a percent increase of 1.98%. To put that into history, you'll see that over the last 4 years, we have been looking at very moderate increases in our local school budget. We have worked very hard to make sure that we keep the request reasonable, conservative, and that it gives us what we need to continue improving the schools, but is not exorbitant. The budget every year begins with efficiencies. Every year we look first to see where we can save before moving on. This year I'm going to show salaries both as an efficiency and as a cost driver. Remember that nearly 80% of our budget in the public schools is made up of salaries and associated benefits. We are a people-driven organization. Most of the investment that we make is in teachers, nurses, instructional aides, custodians, secretary and clerical supports, and administrators. So every year we know that salary is going to drive our budget, but this year we have once again worked very hard to control that increase by hiring efficiently, by scheduling efficiently, and by being creative in where we place those people resources, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. We're enormously proud this year in that the medical benefits we offer, that we budget for, are going to be below 14 and 15 levels. The negotiations that the Board of Education has entered into with our 5 employee agencies, unions, associations, have changed medical benefits in a way that is beneficial to the system and has worked to bring down costs. And finally, our building and area administrators, the principals and the department leads have worked very hard to keep supplies and material costs low, if not flat. Our medical spending, if you look at the history, $9.3 million for the required medical benefits that we offer to our employees. Again, that is below the spend of 14-15 and well below the high we hit of $10.2 million. And again, credit for that goes to the Board of Education and the negotiations that we've entered into with all of our employees. The budget by location that I mentioned, if you look at any of our school locations, you will see that essentially we are flat, if not decreasing expenditures in almost all of our area locations, the one exception being special education costs, which I'll speak to a little bit more. After we look at the efficiencies, after we look at where we can save monies, we need to honestly look at the cost drivers. The story of this year's budget can be told by 2 numbers. The non-discretionary cost increases that we are experiencing first in salaries. Salaries this year are projected to increase by $888,000. There are 3 significant reasons for that increase. The first is that we are entering into the 3rd year of our employment contract with our largest group of employees, the teachers. And it's not unusual for the 3rd year of any 3-year contract to be the most expensive year. Secondly, we've lost $130,000 going into next year's budget from federal grants that had previously offset that figure. $130,000 is approximately 15% of the overall increase that you see here. That is us locally absorbing the cost that we used to be able to offset with that federal grant. And finally, and this is an extension of that history of low increases that you've seen over the last several years, as we have imposed hiring caps on principals, as we have hired in less experienced and therefore less expensive teachers into our ranks, we now have less expensive, less experienced teachers who every year move up through the 13 steps of our salary scale. So while we hire teachers in at a lower level, the larger number of less experienced teachers moving up through the salary scale creates a more volatile salary line and larger annual increases. That represents teachers who are both moving up through the steps and teachers who are earning additional degrees and moving to higher levels of pay because of their degrees. Second significant number is an increase in tuition. Tuition is a number that represents students that we feel need additional programming and additional services outside what the Guilford Public Schools currently offer. In most cases, this represents special education students with needs that we are not able to currently address in our schools. So that number represents a number of students who are outplaced. The number is changing primarily for two reasons. The first is changing student need. That number represents a very small number of students who have very expensive needs, and even a small number of unanticipated students, new students moving into our community who require support, or students who have experienced a change in their need and require an increasing level of support, requires us to meet those needs, and that may have additional cost. Additionally, at the state level, we have seen declining support from the state of Connecticut for those outplaced expenses. Those two contingencies together create these 2 cost drivers. These 2 items alone push an increase of $1.5 million in our budget, and you'll recall that the whole budget is only increasing by $1.1 million. So we have made other decisions within the budget. We have worked hard to bring down other costs, like medical, to offset these 2 cost drivers. To show you what that special education line looks like, and I know there's a lot going on this slide, but the blue line on the bottom shows our attempt to budget special education. And what you can see from the blue line, it is a very difficult line to budget. It's the single most volatile line in every single Connecticut school budget. Every town in Connecticut works very hard to accurately budget those special education costs. The straight line shows you the trend for our budget. The red line above shows you our actual expenditures in special education, and what you will see is that in 7 out of the past 8 years, we have been under budgeted. We've overspent that special education allocation. And what you'll notice in the trend line there is that those misses over time, in fact, are growing. Now, I will show this additional line because Mr. Hoey asks me to show it every year. What you'll also notice, beginning in school year 12-13, we began working very hard to keep more of our students in Guilford and sending fewer of our students to those outplaced tuitions. I will tell you that in the school year 12-13, we had students outplaced in the high 40s. Currently, we have only about 20 or 25 students who are currently outplaced. If we had continued on the route that we were on, we would be spending much more than we're spending in special education, despite the fact that it's a very volatile line. What I want to add to this slide is I want to say that in addition to the work we've done to be efficient and to try to offset costs, is that I know that we're offering a better service to our students with special needs. By keeping more of those students in district, by meeting their needs with our staff, and by keeping them in schools with their neighbors and peers, we're providing a better service to those students. We're meeting their needs more responsibly, and I believe that we've avoided cost by doing so. Again, I want to mention that every single budget we bring forward, we expect improves our service. We expect to do better every year than we did the year behind us, and we expect to be expanding our services. This year, those investments are fairly modest. This year, we will be investing in increased professional learning, and that falls into primarily 2 areas that I will note. This year, we will be investing in some greater opportunities for students in the areas of clubs and encouraging students to develop creativity and express their voice. But most importantly, this year, we're continuing the investments we've made in other areas, like small class sizes, like an international baccalaureate program at our high school, and like that educational capacity to service our students locally that I just mentioned. The cost of those investments this year is conservative. It's moderate. The increase in professional learning that I mentioned is an increase of $25,000, and it's targeting 2 specific areas. First, the support, social and emotional wellness of our students. We will be doing more work with our school counselors, school social workers, and school psychologists next year to make sure that while we maintain high academic standards and while we provide rigorous instruction, that at the same time we are able to build classroom environments that are supportive while challenging. That our classroom teachers know how to monitor levels of stress and anxiety so that we are encouraging children and not pushing children in an unhealthy way. The second area that we'll be focusing on is that we have a significant transition happening in our leadership team this year. Dr. Ann Keene, who has been the Associate Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction and Assessment for 20 years in Guilford, is moving on. She is retiring. As we have a new person move into that office, we will be ensuring that we have the supports around teaching and learning that we need in the district so that that transition happens smoothly. Those student opportunities that we talked about, we're looking at offering a new club at the high school, a congress of clubs that will work with our high school students to develop their ability to be civic leaders, that will develop their leadership skills, and that will encourage them to identify concerns of interest in their community that they want to address. Rather than having the adults tell the students what is important to them, we want to give the students an opportunity to tell us what is important to them. The figure that you see there is enough to provide for 2 teacher sponsors for that activity, some travel so that they work with other student leaders around the state of Connecticut, and as well as some limited materials. The single greatest request that the Board of Education heard this year from the community that we build into our budget was to expand art time and art opportunities in our elementary schools. While the board did not feel that at this time we could either financially or within the school schedule as it exists expand art time during the day at the elementary level, we do want to offer an opportunity for after-school enrichment opportunities, and so we've set aside some dollars to create art clubs at our elementary schools so that we can, excuse me, so that we can invite students in to expand those opportunities. I told you that 80% of our expenditure comes from staffing. So I want to show you what the staffing impact looks like. In the 4 major areas, we're essentially flat. We are asking for no increase in the administrative staffing in the school systems. We're asking for a slight decrease in teacher staffing, very minimal decrease. We're looking for no increase in para or clerical positions, and we're looking for no increase in the custodial area. I want to note that while we're looking for no increases in staffing across the district, we are in fact bringing 2 further extensions of special education into our system. We will be offering an ABA, or a behavioral support program, at the high school. That is a support that we've been offering at the elementaries and middle schools for years, but for the first time we will be offering at the high school. And we will be offering a therapeutic clinical support program at Adams this year. That is a program that we've offered at the high school to great success for students who are dealing with stress, anxiety, or school avoidance issues, and we will be offering similar supports to students in the 7th and the 8th grade at Adams. We will be expanding both of those programs with current staffing levels. We're not asking for a staffing increase, but we will be providing further opportunities, further supports for our students within the existing staff number. When I talk about being creative with our resources and looking to reallocate, reassign, or redesign positions before asking for additional dollars, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Our bonding request this year is also fairly simple and straightforward. Cox has the original heating and ventilation system that came with the building when it was constructed. That system is failing and it needs to be replaced, and so there's approximately $1.2 million for that project. We continue to have one wing of Melissa Jones that has original windows. Those need to be updated. That allows us to increase both efficiency, energy efficiency by replacing those windows, and for any windows on the first floor, that includes security upgrades as well, because the windows will be reinforced. And then there is an architectural and engineering fee that we roll into a flat request of approximately $3 million for bonding request to improve the energy efficiency and the environment at both Cox and Melissa Jones. These requests come out of a 10-year calendar that we created some years ago, and we have been methodically working our way through that improvement calendar. The bottom line is that this is a conservative budget. It is a modest budget. I refuse to accept that it is a standstill budget. It does move us forward. It improves primarily the social and emotional supports that are in place for our students, while it maintains our focus on academic excellence moving forward. It builds on the work that we've already begun.
So I'm going to, I'm going to talk briefly about where we are as a district and what has happened, what have we been able to do with the budgets that the community has passed and have given us the resources that we've been able to use toward educating our children. This is, we are in what's called the District Reference Group B. That is the second grouping of towns in the state of Connecticut economically. Some of the Fairfield County towns, some of the lower Fairfield County towns are in the Reference Group A. Among the approximately 25 towns that are in the same reference group as us, we are second in the state of Connecticut on the Department of Education's Relative Accountability Index. This is an important measure because this is not just test scores. It includes test scores. It includes the Smarter Balanced Assessment. It includes the science tests. It includes SATs. It includes also, though, access to arts. It includes athletic access. It includes college readiness. It includes chronic absenteeism. The fact is that from a purely socioeconomic point of view, we should be down at the bottom of this because we're toward the bottom of District Reference Group B in just pure terms of socioeconomics. However, something's different in Guilford. We have done a good job in implementing the curriculum and making sure that our children are learning. Now, this is, I'm going to show you the state of Connecticut, some of the top schools in the state of Connecticut. These are the top 3 schools, New Canaan, Darien, and Greenwich. New Canaan, just for your information, spends about a little over $20,000 per student. Darien spends $21,000. Greenwich spends about $21,000. They're fantastic school districts. When I was before the board on February 14th, Valentine's Day, I was using last year's numbers for where we are in the state of Connecticut. Probably you're thinking, well, then last year we were 4th, if you remember. This year, still 4th. This is the entire state of Connecticut, 169 towns. The towns above us spend between over 20,000 in all other circumstances and over 21,000 in one circumstance. We spend, counting debt service, we spend $17,437 per student. These are the rest of the top 20. These are some outstanding school districts. We do a better job, according to the state of Connecticut, on the district accountability indicators than all of them. Our per-student expenditure is 57th in the state of Connecticut, counting debt service. Median household income is 31st. That's what I said before. We're economically toward the bottom of reference group B. Our SAT scores, 12th in the state of Connecticut. English language arts proficiency in the elementaries and the middle schools, 8th in the state of Connecticut. Math proficiency, 5th in the state of Connecticut. And for those of you who've been following what's been happening in our schools for a while, this is a complete change from what this used to be. It wasn't that long ago that when we put this slide up at our Board of Education meetings, we were in the 40s. We were 45th in the state of Connecticut in 2006. This is not an accident. This is because of curricular changes. This is because of good professional development. It's because we have recommitted to making sure that that we're implementing the math curriculum effectively. And as I said earlier, we are 4th in the entire state of Connecticut on the broadest measure of performance that the state of Connecticut measures. And again, no accident. It's because of small class sizes. It's because of good administrative accountability. It's because of good professional development. It's because we've been able to hire wisely. All of this is a result of conscious decisions that have been made by the leadership and the faculty in the schools, but also we've been able to do it because of the support of the community passing responsible budgets. So we believe that we continue to be one of the most successful districts in the state of Connecticut. We want to improve, and we expect to be able to continue to improve. We are one of the only high schools now in the state of Connecticut with the International Baccalaureate program. We're going to graduate our first class in that this year. We hear from colleges, we hear from athletic directors that people are proud of Guilford schools and are pleased with the kind of progress we've been making. We want to continue to do what we've been doing for the last several years, and that is to provide an unparalleled return on investment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So at this point, you've heard the presentation. We would like to open up any questions from the public while Chairman Bloss and Dr. Freeman are here and standing, so we don't have to have them get up and down, up and down. And just come on up, and you probably know the routine of name and address for the record, and then fire away. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. Susan Anderhagen, 200 Landon's Way, and I'll have this question for the town offices too. And thank you for your presentation. I actually had written down a question on the professional development, so I appreciate you answering that. And this isn't probably for this year, but going into next year, the governor has already said that if we don't start to look at regionalization, he will start to look at that for us. And I know that I worked on one of the boards of Danbury Hospital when hospitals started regionalizing and creating the networks we have today. So Danbury Hospital, Norwalk Hospital, New Milford Hospital joined to become Western Connecticut Health Network. You've got Yale, New Haven with Bridgeport and Greenwich that have created. So regionalization is done to save some of the costs and have economies of scale. And I wanted to know, I realize it's too late for this year's budget, but what we're going to be looking at for regionalization possibilities.
Sure. So I'm happy to mention some of the things that we do currently in that area. we partner with a number of local school districts over a number of different initiatives. And so there are times that we will collaborate on professional development around teaching topics. Most recently, we've been collaborating with other school districts looking at the issue of student stress and anxiety and sharing informational topics. One of the pieces I'm most proud of, and one of the most concrete pieces, is that for years now, we have been part of a 3-town collaborative with both Clinton and Madison. We are responsible to meet the needs of our students, many of our students, through the age of 21. Students who have special needs, transitional needs, or do not graduate at 18, we're responsible to meet those needs through age 21. We created a local transitional program with those other 2 towns where instead of sending our students, and this would be reflected in that tuition line that we showed earlier, instead of sending those students to a program in New Haven at a significant cost, we're now meeting the needs of those students locally here in those 3 towns through that collaborative arrangement. Additionally, we work with the towns of North Branford and Guilford in providing the adult education that we are required to provide to our community by statute. So we offer second language services, we offer GED services, we offer continuing education opportunities. We're required to offer those to the town by statute under a free and appropriate education, and we do that collaboratively with another of other towns. And most recently, when I mentioned that special education capacity that we have been building out, in the last couple of years at a very small level, it is not something that I would identify as a significant revenue stream, but in fact, in the last few years, because of the local capacity that we have been able to build, when we have the opportunity to do that, we have brought students from other towns into the Guilford Public Schools, and we have charged tuition to those communities. So again, it's nothing that we would design to be a revenue stream, but if we have the ability to do so and it offsets our local costs and helps a child who lives in a neighboring community, then we've become a billing tuition destination in a few isolated cases over the last few years.
And I guess I just want to say a word about budgets, state budgets in general. Just to refresh everybody's recollection, who remembers what the governor's budget proposal was last year? It cut our budget, our ECS share, by $2.5 million. It had us picking up 1/3 of the teachers' pensions. How much of that actually happened? None. So governors can ask for what they want to ask for, and that's fine. He's obviously new to the office. He is able to make proposals, and that's fine. I think it's very hard for us to plan from a budgetary point of view to say, well, gee, the governor's proposals are going to be law. They're probably not. Are there going to be changes for Guilford? Probably. Are they going to be what the governor is proposing? Probably not. There are things that I think when I go back to the per student cost, and we were looking at that slide, there are some districts, small districts, particularly up in the northwest corner, that spend a lot of money per student. But where we start off coming from a pretty efficient place, we think that regionalization, and it depends on the form. Does it mean busing kids to another town? Does it mean sharing capacity of whatever sort? Sometimes it makes sense, and as Dr. Freeman indicated, we've done that in some areas. There's some areas, frankly, we thought about trying to do cooperative health insurance purchasing. The honest answer is it wouldn't be in Guilford's benefit, because the program that we have in Guilford, that the teachers have been, and the other unions have been very cooperative about, frankly, you can see what the result has been. So no, I don't particularly want to join with another town on their program, at least not the way we are now and the way some of the other towns are now.
Thank you. Any other questions for the Board of Education? You're all shy?
Can I just say I want to say one other thing if I can, just briefly.
All right, and then you're on.
Slide, I just want to remind everybody, the enrollment slide that shows our enrollment is not particularly drastically impacted as it has been in some towns. I just want to remind everybody that is notwithstanding the senior citizen tax freeze that we have in Guilford, that is easily the most progressive senior tax freeze in the state of Connecticut, that I think approximately 800 families in Guilford are in. That has undoubtedly kept people, seniors in town. that you can make a pretty good argument that but for the senior tax freeze, our enrollment would be completely flat. We are very proud of the senior tax freeze, and I'll let Mr. Hoy talk about this during the second part of the presentation, but my understanding is the senior tax freeze is fully protected in this budget. He says it is. So I think that the enrollment that we've got is really outstanding, that is notwithstanding the fact that 10% of our houses are in this senior tax freeze. So, I'm sorry.
Mr.
Ladies and
McGowan,
gentlemen, my name is Kelly McGowan. I live at Westlake Avenue. I've been here about 30 years. And I just want to emphasize what a great school system we do have. My youngest daughter graduated in 2014 from Benton University. That school is rated 3rd in the country. She's now presently in Hartford for her master's and already has a job offer. My oldest graduated in 2004, 4-year college, and now is happily employed by the Postal Service. So as far as the school system goes, it's outstanding. I know a lot of people when they hear it, you live in Guilford. Huh, we're a cream of the crop, you know? So I think you gentlemen are doing a great job, Mr. Hovey as well. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much.
I'm not a very good public speaker, so excuse my nervousness.
Glad to have you.
thank you for coming up. And we won't force you to ask a question. That's fine. We're good. Any other questions? Great. Thank you, Chairman Bloss. Dr. Freeman. We are now going to, well, actually, do we have any burning questions, Board of Finance colleagues? Do we want to hold off?
We can wait till our
Wait,
meeting
wait until
2 days from
Thursday?
now.
Okay, perfectly fine here. That being said, we're going to go on to the presentation of the town by First Selectman Matt Hoey. I think we might need a second for transition, but maybe while that's happening, sometimes you just start talking and Karen can take care of all this. So.
Just start rambling?
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. So just give us 1 second and, well, or maybe not.
Where do we get to the time?
Actually, while the presentation's coming up, which it almost is, again, I just wanted to reiterate that there will be a lot of numbers that I will attempt to go through that will talk about the budgets that have been presented and as they stood on February 7th and therefore February 14th when we had our regular meeting, and how the impact of the governor's budget, proposed budget, would affect the numbers as well in terms of mill rate and tax increase. So stay tuned. Whenever you're ready. Okay, Karen, don't rush. Relax, it's okay.
The woman behind the curtain, Karen Quischer, thank you very much for pulling that together, and all the work you've done on this PowerPoint itself. So this doesn't happen magically. Karen, you've done a terrific job in getting us to this point, so thank you. Our mission, not quite as elaborate as that of the Board of Education, is to serve our residents in a variety of capacities: public safety, infrastructure maintenance, culture and tourism, quality of life, and you could take all of our departments and plug them into one of those categories. We, the Board of Selectmen, and I want to mention that this is being proffered to you as a result of a unanimous vote of the Board of Selectmen. We worked hard. I wouldn't call it pulled some punches, threw some punches, but we had some pretty significant discussions. And in the end, we wound up coming up with compromises within the organization. So this came to us, comes to you as a 5-0 vote, a bipartisan 5-0 vote of the Board of Selectmen. So what were our budget objectives and key factors? We need to continue to deliver a high level of service in the face of increased demand, and particularly with uncertainty with state funding. We need to maintain the essential safety and public protection services that our residents have come to expect, and at the same level of professionalism that we have been operating under for several years, many years actually. We, as Chairman Bloss led you to believe, we have maintained the current funding levels for the senior tax freeze program. We have maintained capital budget funding within the operating budget. Unfortunately, we have not been able to reverse a couple-year trend where we have dropped down from about a 25% higher level a couple of years ago. We also have fully funded our pension obligations at actuarial recommended levels. This is pretty important. Our pension plans are all funded in the low 80s to high 80s, the three basic plans. On the town side, they're both at about 85 or 86%. And that's the result of a commitment to continue to fund at the actuarial levels. And we've done that over several years while dropping our assumed rate of return on our investment portfolio. So it has been a struggle to stay there because we've had to pass along additional costs because we've lowered the assumption rate. But we've continued to fund it because we think it's essential. Our employees deserve to have it. Our taxpayers deserve not to have something come 10, 15 years down the road, like what is going on with the state and the state employees' funds, as well as the teacher pension plans. This budget does call for some increased investments, and those investments largely in two areas. Maintaining our infrastructure and roads. We have seen over the past 5 or 6 years a decline in the number of roads that we've been able to chip seal. It has been very convenient for us to go to capital and to those kind of projects when we've needed to make some cuts. So we had a high of, in 2015, of 11.14 miles chip sealed. This past year we did 6.8, I think it was. In this budget we intend to reverse that. There are also some other infrastructure needs that are going to be addressed here. Additionally, since I stepped into the office, it became readily apparent to me that we had long neglected investments in infrastructure and technology on the town side. So this budget includes some investments, and we'll talk a little bit about that, predominantly in additional personnel, as well as some capital to refresh our technology to get it to a point where it is a tool for our employees that makes them more productive and enhances their performance. The proposed budget we're bringing to you from the town is $30,607,971, or a 3.8% increase. And you can see how it's broken out between the departmental budgets, employee benefits, and the capital budget itself. We're maybe getting a little ahead of ourselves, Mike, here. This is usually a slide that you would put together, but we've thrown it in here anyway. Debt service is increasing by 12% this year, largely related to the long anticipated, this is the second to last year of the dramatic increases in debt service as a result of the building of that phenomenal high school that our children are able to take advantage of. So when you combine the Board of Education budget at 1.98%, the total recommended budget on an expenditure basis is 3.43%. But it's important to note that we've worked, because of some increased revenues on the local side, not the state side, the overall anticipated tax increase is a result of the Board of Selectmen's budget, the Board of Education's budget, and the debt service would be about a 2.2% tax increase. So that's the baseline that we're working from. We have added we have added positions to this budget, and they're in three distinct areas. The first is in public safety IT. Currently today, our public safety departments, both the police and the fire department, utilize outside consultants to perform day-to-day, but they do day-to-day stuff as well as project work, and we also have some sworn officers who get to pitch in occasionally, and that cuts into some of the productivity of their jobs. So about 7 months ago, we put together a task force between the town offices, police department, fire department, to evaluate the needs, the IT needs. So we have determined that we would be most effectively served as a result of bringing on a specialist, an IT specialist who has familiarity with public safety applications, particularly public safety applications. So that position would be offset by savings in some of the consulting dollars that we have typically used. The second position is at Park and Recreation. For a number of years, Park and Recreation has been looking for another maintainer to keep up with the demand, the current demand on taking care of all of the properties, the parks, the fields, as well as winter activities with snow removal, et cetera. We have neglected to give them that position over time. They've also identified an opportunity. We have had, I would say, Rick, a woeful record with our garbage haulers on the town garbage services. I can't tell you how many times this past summer I had folks calling in the office or visiting me suggesting that we needed something done with the garbage around the town green. Same thing with overflows at the beach. Because of the schedule of Mondays and Fridays, we have very little flexibility. Anything that we needed done outside of those collection days was normally going to be charged. And we had, Rick will tell you, we had difficulty. This is the third hauler we've used who we think has been far less than responsive. So this position would be a part-time garbage collection as well as a fields maintainer. You'll see some corresponding costs related to this because we're going to need to get a truck that does garbage hauling. That is, where's Susan? Susan, that's a possible opportunity with Madison. I've had discussions with Tom Banish and Madison on that. Their public works, not public works or their parks folks, they also pick up their own garbage. They do not have a vehicle like that, and they'd be willing to consider some kind of arrangement. Again, we're only going to be using it 2 days a week, so there is an opportunity there. The costs associated with this position are offset by the contract that we had, which this year was anticipated to be $45,000 with a garbage hauler for services that we don't find acceptable. So that's the second position. The third position is in Youth and Family Services, and this position has been in existence for 8 years. It's a position that is funded through a grant program, and this transfer into the system as a full-time employee, I think gives us a better accounting, because in a couple of years, there's grant money that's going to potentially be expiring, and we need to account for those salaries and the headcount in our budget. So the total new salaries are going to be $172,000, but offset by the $137,000 in consulting fees and grant monies. Yeah. One thing that is, thank you very much, Mary Jane. One thing that's important to take a look at, the 1.65% current salary increase. And that is largely the result of, and despite the, excuse me, let me back up. We, like many other municipalities, are bound by contractual arrangements in terms of salary increases. And I think that most of the contracts that have been negotiated over the past 3 to 4 years carried increases between 2.25 and 2.6 or 2.7. So our increase is only 1.65 because this reflects personnel turnover over the past 15 months. And we have been able to hire replacements in some cases at significantly less than they were being paid before. So thank you, Mary Jane. All right, we have several notable increases in the operating budget. The communications budget, that's largely the result of, that is where that public safety IT resource is going to wind up being housed and budgeted for. Under employee benefits on the town side, we have Dr. Freeman and Mr. Bloss had very good news on the medical side. Not so much for us. We had a significant increase. The Board of Education, I think, saw 31 less contracts or employees taking the medical coverage this year. And the town had an increase of 11. I think most of those were probably associated, or at least 8 of them might have been associated with the new fire personnel that we had brought on. So we saw a significant increase, about a little over $300,000 in medical costs for our employees. And to continue to fund the pensions at the actuarial recommended levels, we were required to put in an additional $133,000 under the pension line item. The fire increase is, I want to put this up there because it's nominal, 2.8%, and that largely is responsible largely because they have been able to offset some of their replacement salary costs as a result of the new staffing that was brought on for the North Guilford station. Under legal, what we're doing here is we're budgeting more realistically. Our legal expenses have gone up dramatically, and in anticipation of the continued property tax appeals, as well as several pieces of litigation that we have in hand, and general legal expense is responsible for increase there. We're probably going to be we're going to be over expended in that line item this year, so the board said let's budget it accurately. At Park and Recreation, you see an increase there of 3.54%, and that includes that additional salary line item. At the police department, most of those are salary-related costs, particularly as they relate to replacement salaries when officers are out, either on leave, disability, or on sickness. And Public Works, talked a little bit about that earlier. This is to try to get us back to doing the 10 or 11 miles of chip sealing every summer. Because at the rate we're going at now, it's just not sustainable. We did have some reductions in the operating budget, and these are largely the result of the salaries that I talked about earlier, salary replacements, folks who are leaving and being replaced. And that includes resources in town clerk, the finance, engineering, assessor's office, as well as cutting some expenses associated with the Board of Assessment Appeals as well. On our capital budget, we are, I believe, $6,000, about $6,000 more than we spent last year. A couple of years ago, for those who have paid attention over the last 8 to 10 years, we were gradually trying to ramp that up on more of a pay-as-you-go for your capital items. I think it had been a topic of significant discussion with the Board of Finance. I know it had been. And we had been as low as about $500,000 in that line item back 7 or 8 years ago. And it got up over $1 million. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, we've had to make some tough choices, and it was down to about the 860 level. So at this point, we're not enthused, but we know we had to go there in order to bring a budget in at the level it is in. So some of these projects would include, at the fire department, replacing materials, hazmat materials, air pack cylinders, hoses, stretchers. At the waste transfer station, that sticks up there as one that you probably haven't seen on the slide for very long. That's because we've neglected that facility for far too long. I'm in the middle of discussions with Tom Banish in Madison, because that is one of the shared services that we have with Madison. And We are reconstituting the Waste Transfer Station Advisory Committee, which has been dormant since 2004, and that body is responsible for making recommendations to both communities as to the operational efficiencies improvements at that. Guilford has 3 representatives on that board. So far, I have 2 volunteers to serve on that board, so this is a cheap public service announcement. If anybody wants to serve on the Waste Transfer Advisory Board, please call my office, and we'll make sure we get you engaged. Some of these other capital projects at Public Works are drainage and vehicle maintenance items, those kind of things. Information systems, we're talking about new firewalls to protect us. I don't know if somebody saw it, there was a town in Connecticut that this week was attacked, and they're paying ransomware with bitcoins or something, but their system was compromised, locked down, and they were, unfortunately, they had to pay the extortion fees. At the library, it's things like a roof, roof work, as well as paving the parking lot and some IT expenditures. At the police department, vehicles. Most of the ask in that department is vehicles, and that's on a regularly scheduled basis. Excuse me. So the Board of Selectmen was presented with a significantly higher target or request for capital projects. We've moved some things out. We found other funding sources for some of those requests, either unexpired bond allocations, grants, and the board has made a suggestion to Park and Recreation that a couple of their capital projects be funded through their program fees and the program fee account. Bonded capital projects. The Board of Selectmen is traditionally on a 2-year cycle. We did not ask for bonded projects last year. What you see in front of you is what the board has put forward. Most of it is not most of it. It's all related to long-term investments over a certain dollar amount, and we feel they're most appropriately funded through the proceeds of bonds. One I want to talk about in particular is that wash bay construction. Some of you may recall from years past that we had already gone out and tried to fund that. We did receive a $500,000 authorization from the voters. However, the numbers have come back in significantly higher than that, so we need to supplement that original appropriation. Why is the truck wash important? Well, this is where the state government comes into play. DEP has introduced some pretty stringent regulations relative to what they call stormwater runoff. In fact, there is a program, the MS4 Stormwater Runoff Program, that we are diligently working to become in compliance with. You can't wash trucks in the yard anymore. They have the residue, the water has to be collected. So every community in the state of Connecticut is facing something along these lines to remain in compliance with DEP. And you can see some of the other items. I won't bore you to tears because you can read. Let's go to the operating revenue side. We have seen some increases. I talked earlier about that 3.43% overall increase. It's offset by the fact that we had some grand list growth this year of about 0.49%, which resulted in over $460,000 in new tax revenue based on the 2018-2019 mill rate. We also have significantly increased our projections for interest income, and that's just a reflection of what the market is. A couple of years ago, we were collecting $60,000 or $80,000 in this line item because, as most of you probably know, if you had any cash sitting on the sidelines, you weren't. It was probably costing you more in bank fees to keep it in cash than it was in interest that you were earning. So that we have significantly increased that number. In total, we're looking for about $520,000 in increased revenue. We also budgeted for what we actually got from the state of Connecticut. I talked earlier that Chairman Bloss talked earlier about Governor Malloy's budget that did not materialize. We actually got more than we had anticipated getting in those line items when we were doing this at the same time last year. And I think that's largely as a result of the strength of and the influence of our representatives in Hartford, Sean Scanlon and Ted Kennedy at the time, and now we're banking on Christine Cohen advocating for us as well. So the total increase in revenue is $624,000, which is how we were able to bring that 3.43% increase down to a 2.2% tax increase. The elephant in the room, or not really, we've already talked about it. This is the impact of the governor's budget proposal. As you can see, Guilford would lose about $590,000. All of that is in ECS money. Last year, the legislature tweaked the formula for ECS, and affluent communities like Guilford were targeted. However, the plan at that point was to gradually introduce those cuts over time at about 8% per year. Once again, our state delegation did their job, and we received more in ECS than we had anticipated or that was called for with the new ECS formula last year. The teacher's retirement, the number right now is $166,000, and it's based on, for those who have not seen the details, is there is an average teacher's salary across the state of Connecticut. So there's a baseline in there for what the contribution, the normalized contribution would be for maintaining those pensions. It's not the entire amount, it's 33% of it, of that number, is my understanding. Also, affluent communities are being penalized under the governor's proposal. For those whose salaries are higher than the average, they're going to get a little extra zing. So our number includes a little extra contribution, which obviously would get redistributed, theoretically redistributed to support other districts. I am of I share that same opinion as Chairman Bloss. The budget that was presented is a starter. It was a conversation starter on the part of the new governor. I do know that both caucuses up in Hartford are not happy with it, some of them for differing reasons. And I can assure you that you will not see the governor's budget implemented. I'll go a step further. You said probably not. I'll bet you $1 that it doesn't, that we won't see those numbers. We'll see something other than that. And I think this board is probably going to have some discussions about where we ought to posture that. For those that recall, 2 years ago, in a similar circumstance, we anticipated $1 million cut in ECS, which we thought was prudent at the time. It didn't turn out to be that significant a cut from us, once again, owing to the strength of our delegation. Debt service, let me quickly run through this. We have a 12% debt service increase, largely as a result of the new high school. The town has some increases as well. We are funding the energy performance contract, which we entered into December of 2017. And our costs, the 20-year lease costs, are now part of debt service. This is a slide that Mary Jane's going to talk to, because this is one that I know that the chairman was very much interested in seeing, and what happens with our debt projection over time.
Thank you. Yeah, this slide is a little different than we've seen in prior years. I was asked by the chairman to include what our debt would look like if we were to bond every dollar we had authorized as of today. So I'll just go through the slide a little bit. I'll start at the bottom is the town projects that we currently are paying debt on now. The next one up is school projects, not counting the high school. The largest jump after that is the high school. That number includes everything that we have bonded for already and the estimate of a final bond authorization that we need once we get the final results in from the state audit. The other two items are new. So we have a number of items currently that we are authorized to bond for, but we haven't done the projects yet, we haven't spent the money yet, so therefore we haven't bonded for the money yet, because the town has historically covered those costs up until we need to bond, and then we reimburse ourselves. If we were to bond every dollar we were authorized to do tomorrow, that's what we would be paying in the next line. Obviously, that is not how we do our projections. It is over time that we will do that as we need the money. The top one in the light group is the items that are proposed in this upcoming budget. And as the first selectman noted, it includes a 2-year bond authorization for both the school and the town, on the assumption that that's what we would go back to doing as was done a couple of years ago. So if you take all the requests that the Board of Ed and the town has over a 2-year period, and you bond for them right away, that's that. Obviously, we would not do that again. But what this shows you is even if we were to do that, we are still pretty much within our projections over the year. As the first selectman noted, in 2021 is what we have been annually telling you is the height of our debt, and that is still holds true today. So next year's budget, you should see the highest debt actual costs that we would come to the residents for to cover all of our requests. And after that, you should see our debt diminish over time, because those other two line items, we would never bond everything right away. But as you can see, even if we were, it only dips up into that line a little bit. So hopefully that's what the chairman was looking to see. And if anybody has any questions later, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Appreciate
Okay, I'm going to try to get through this a little quicker. Significant budget highlights. The Board of Selectmen reduced the original department budget request by almost $440,000. Our increase in salaries is 2.79, but it would have been 1.65% without the new positions. We have maintained capital funding levels. State funding estimates are based on 2018, 2019 actuals, and we did have grand list growth of just under, just 4.49%. There are some other considerations, and talked to you about this at our February meeting that are not in this budget that we would like you to consider at some point. Reevaluation. We do not have anything currently in the assigned fund for reevaluation. We anticipate it's going to cost $400,000 for the 2022 reval. So at some point, we're going to need to either include that in one operating budget or start to fund it over the next couple of years. The other is the other post-employment benefits, OPEB. We've talked about this, and appreciate the board's commitment last year to start to fund a trust. These are the benefits that some of our employees are entitled to after they retire and before they go on to Medicare at 65. We have we have a couple of contracts that include that, but we have a liability that I believe in the last audit is about $28 million over time. The good news is, from a financial perspective, that we are not incurring any significant increases to that, because they are not being written into the employment contracts, and they've been actually taken out of most of the employment contracts. So it's kind of it's somewhat leveled off. It will grow over time based on inflation, but we need to start funding that, because today we pay for it as we go. It's about what, $1.5 million a year. I think that number is relatively close out of our budget. What we were attempting to do was to set up a trust similar to what we have for the pension, so that eventually we will not be paying for all of it out of the operating budget, and that there'll be a trust that will earn and will grow so that we can pay the benefits out of that fund. Our recommendation is that you look to the medical benefits account where we are projecting there's going to be probably about $4.5 million surplus in that account at the end of 2019 fiscal year. We'd recommend $700,000 or $800,000. That would get us to either $900,000 or $1 million in that account, which over 2 years I think is pretty significant to start to go after that liability. Lastly, similar to what the Board of Education, what are you getting for those tax dollars? One of the big expenditures and increase in expenditures over the past couple of years has been in the fire department with the hiring of the 8 new firefighters to staff and man the North Guilford Fire Station. These numbers are pretty interesting. You continue to see increased demand for service calls over the last 5 years. Nearly 1 additional call per day over the last 5 years. But the one on the right is particularly enlightening for me. If you take a look at the average response times in North Guilford, in 2017, it was about 13 minutes per response. Now, what you have to understand is most of our calls in fire are for EMT, for our medical. EMT or paramedic required. So what we have done by staffing that, and this doesn't reflect a full year either, this is only the data to date, that we have dropped the average response times from 13 minutes to 8 minutes. I personally will tell you, I have a friend who lives in North Guilford who is alive today because of that kind of response time. Suffered a massive heart attack, but was saved because of that response time. I think Brian McGlone is friendly with the same guy, so and he'll tell you the story as well. So that, in addition to all the other calls and all the other work the fire department does, that's where some of your tax dollars are going, and that's how the community is benefiting. The police department responded last year to over 11,600 incidents, and those range from simple to very complex. And as we all know, there have been some pretty significant events that have taken place in this community over the last couple of years, and the police department has been in the middle of most of those serious ones. Public Works responded to 21 major weather events. Chip sealed, that 8.5 was for 2017. The 2018 budget was down to 6.3. They reconstructed 1,520 feet of new road with drainage and paving. Park and Recreation served over 20,000 participants in 625 classes. That's a phenomenal number of people that are being touched. More importantly, 33,500 meals. I defy any other community to say they have a better program for the senior citizens than Guilford does. For those who haven't had the opportunity, stop by at lunchtime on either Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday and volunteer to serve our seniors. You'll find anywhere from 60 to 120 seniors in here on any given day enjoying a reduced priced lunch. For some of these seniors, it's the only socialization they get in the course of a day. It's a phenomenal event. It's phenomenal what we do for the seniors in this community. At the library, Rob's team recorded an all-time high. Over 28,000 people attended a library program in the last year. And take a look at this last one. I'd be curious to see what that number of computer or wireless incidents was 10 years ago. I bet it was a fraction of that number. So what that says is the library's made a transition over the past several years from the classic books, brick and mortar library to a combination where they offer a significant number of online services as well. Youth and Family Services, 2,300 program participants, 2,000 clinical appointments to some of the neediest people in our community. And most of those can't afford services outside of what they are getting at Youth and Family Services. The Health Department has conducted over 650 inspections. That is up from previous years as well. One of the successes in this community of late has been we're becoming a restaurant mecca, particularly downtown. As those continue to expand, so does our demand on our health department. Social services, again, serving many who have no other place to go. 633 households in 20 programs, from oil assistance programs to helping folks apply and get Social Security disability. The work they do over there is amazing. The town clerk, significant number of deeds, election ballots, and licenses and permits out of a relatively small office. And the assessor manages over 20 tax assistant programs, and you can read the balance of those. With that, I'm done. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your consideration of this budget. Once again, I want to remind you that this came to you with a unanimous vote of the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, First Selectman Hoey. So we will follow the same format that we did for the Board of Education. Oh, you weren't supposed to sit down. You're supposed to stand up. Does anybody have any questions for the Board of Selectmen and the town budget? And First Selectman Hoey, come on up.
Me again. Thanks, Matt. I have 3 questions, actually. Golf course. Several years ago, I think we heard from Joe Mazza that the golf course was losing money, and if it continued to do so, we were going to have to do something different. And if I'm reading the budget correctly, it looks like we're losing $100,000 on the golf course. I think it said we bring in $181,000, and it's costing us $283,000. I'm not a golfer, so to me, that seems like a lot of money to lose. That's, I guess, question number 1. Maybe I'll just ask all 3. Second is, I know that Danielle, the animal control officer, I think took another position, and I wanted to see if that was an opportunity for regionalization with Madison. I hear friends in Madison who say that their animal control officer does not work full-time. So again, don't know the details behind that. And then the third thing is, last year we were all here having a discussion about not getting the money, the bang for the buck in our investments of our money, and I didn't know, Ken was talking about that a lot. I didn't know if that was the thing that you reflected in that interest income, or whether that was that, okay. So that's 3.
I'll take them in reverse order. On the investment, yes, as a result of some of the work that Ken did with Mary Jane, and as well as a better understanding of how much of our funds were available, we have increased that. Now, some of that is also attributed to market factors, but we did address that. We put a committee together. Ken was helpful with Mary Jane in working towards ensuring that we were most effective in garnering those, what we could. The second is the animal control officer. Interestingly enough, I had a conversation with the chief a couple weeks ago about that very subject, and I'd like to defer to him relative to his posture, his position on it.
Thank you. Good question. For those who don't know, we have 2 animal control officers, and one of the officers just took another position within the town. We're currently trying to, we've posted and tested for a replacement on that. So we do have another full-time animal control officer. We've had discussions in the past with other communities about regionalizing. When we built the animal shelter, that was a big topic for discussion, and we've had continuing conversations as well. There's a difference, and I'll echo what was stated by Mr. Bloss, in that there are certain things that make sense to regionalize on, and we regionalize on a lot of efforts. At this point, Madison, I know I've had conversations with them. They regionalized with Clinton on their animal control, is my understanding. And the types of services provided by different animal control officers and animal shelters vary between towns, and at this point, that's not something we're exploring, but it doesn't mean that we wouldn't necessarily look at it moving forward. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Chief. The third question was on the golf course, and Susan, thank you for reminding me. I should have mentioned this earlier in my presentation, because I thought I was going to remember it. There was a subject of much discussion at several of the Board of Selectmen meetings and workshops on the budget. And what we wound up doing with the golf course this year was we flat funded it with the exception of the contracted salary increases. The Golf Commission had come in asking for additional monies for their pro and for several other items. Because we share the same sentiments and frustrations about the ability of that golf course to drive more revenue, we have agreed, and it'll be I've been tasked with putting together a committee, more than likely with representatives from the Golf Commission, Park and Rec, as well as the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen, to look to see what we're going to do with the golf course long-term. Many folks have considered that to be an expense similar to what we do with some of the other recreational facilities that we have in this community that don't necessarily cover the costs. For instance, beach passes, those kind of things, they don't necessarily cover the cost of the work we do in that regard. So this was often considered along those lines. But as that gap, that revenue gap has grown over the past few years, it's gotten everybody's attention. So we will be addressing that in terms of what do we do with that long term? And does it remain a golf course? We've had these discussions on and off over the years. One of the challenges was we took out a bond to do the reconstruction of that course several years ago, and there were a number of folks who felt that would be foolish to be paying for something we couldn't use. However, now we are paying even more for something that many folks use. So, does that answer your questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions regarding the town budget? Come on up. Just a reminder, name and address for the record.
Janet McClure, 132 Old Quarry Road. I noticed you skipped over the rubber playing field at the high school. Why are we paying $300,000 for that? Was a line item? I mean, if it's defective and it's under warranty, why don't we simply return it?
It's a very good question. Is that the only question you have?
This will be a good confirmation.
That's a very good question. What we had up there was for the stadium field, the one that has been in existence for 12 years. That's a replacement of that field.
Oh, it's not
It's
the
not the
high
one,
school.
it is the high school. It's the main stadium field where all the bleachers are, down in the lower one. Not the one that...
not the new one
Not the
that's
new one that we
already-
are, yeah, well, we have a mediation agreement on that as well.
You
So,
do?
Yes, we do.
What is it?
Disclosure, I can't disclose at this point the details of it, but the field will be replaced without, the only cost to Guilford will be our legal costs and engineering oversight of the project. So that will be the only cost to Guilford for the repair of that field, estimated to be about $1 million.
Does it come with a guarantee, the new one? too?
Actually, it does, and there was a series of emails going back and forth today that I participated in. The contractors in the mediation agreement are trying to say 7 years. We're insisting on 8, which was the original warranty period for that field.
Okay, I have one more
Certainly.
comment. My 2 cents on the golf is, if the people that use it don't want to support it, why do the rest of us have to? I don't play golf, and, up the fees and have it pay for itself, or let the grass grow. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to just note really quickly in that question, the first one about the field. This is that fact fiction that I actually alluded to before. I'm very happy that you came up and asked that question. That's a very, very good question about the field, because there could be an interpretation that someone looks at that and says, oh, that field is defective and we're spending money on it, where it's actually under warranty for labor and materials. And yes, there is a small amount that we cannot charge back regarding legal fees and for the services of just oversight, but the labor and materials are going to be replaced. That's why that question. So if anybody else has a question like that, this is the time to ask it and put it out there so that we all know, what's the underlying facts. So thank you for coming up on that. Appreciate it. Any other questions for the town? No? Okay. Board of Finance. Any questions? I'm going to break my rule. I have one. And I wrote it down as you were going through staffing and the increases. I should know the answer to this, but I'd rather have you answer it. And that is, when was the last time we added any staff to the town budget?
Mitch? The firefighters, right?
The firefighters, I probably should say with the exception of the firefighters, because there was a grant, there was a need, there was a community outpouring of people coming out.
I
But
don't recall specifically when, but I do know Public Works had one added in maybe 4 or 5 years ago, because we had dropped 2 or 3 8 to 10 years ago, and he added one back.
We got one back in. We also added one back into Park and Rec a few years back. It's been the onesie twosies, Mike. It's been
there hasn't been overall increases of 1, 2 a year. It's been, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've had, some partials.
Right.
Right.
And I should know the answer to that too, Mike, because it's contained in the audit book that we're going to be talking about in about a week and a half.
Yes,
It's
our
at the-
regular
it's at
meeting,
the
if
back.
everyone wants to go to an incredibly exciting meeting, we go through the audits for last fiscal year, so. I know. That's her, I know, that's her, what she goes to bed with, sleeps with. Yeah, I got it. Thank you, Matt, appreciate that. And yeah, actually, that will come out, possibly in our next regular meeting. Any other questions for the, oh, Veronica, did you had your hand up?
It's all right, I can wait till Thursday.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Any other questions for the Board of Education or the town? You were sitting there thinking, I really should have asked that question. All right, I'll give you a shot. What I'd like to do now is recap. There's a lot of numbers here. It took me a while to try to practice this and figure out where I was going to go with all this. So what I'd like to do is just, again, go through a very quick recap of what we heard, not go through the detail, but just make sure we are all on the same page. Again, what I'm really doing is setting the stage for Thursday and where we're going to be headed on our discussions. So, we have heard that the town has come forward with an operating budget of $30,607,971. That is an increase of $1,140,993, which is a 3.87% change, increase. The total debt service is, that's requested, $9,516,344, with a change of $1,019,690. That's a 12% increase. And the Board of Education has come forward with an operating budget request of $60,675,831, which is a change of $1,178,656, which is an increase of 1.98%. What that means is a 3.43% combined budget request increase. And we would need to raise, I'll go into revenue, well, let me go into revenue, because that's the next step I was going to go. We would need to raise that in revenue, obviously. Now, we have, and I'm not going to go into details because it's in the presentation that we heard, but the non-tax revenue that we have coming in, and this was as of February 7th, before Board of Tax Appeals, I might add. I always have to add that disclaimer. Thank you, Mary Jane. Is 6.4%, which means by the amount to raise from taxes would be 93.6% of what we need. The net change in non-tax revenue, dollar amount-wise, of the 6.4 is $624,472, and that's coming from areas that Mr. Hoey spoke about. This would be everything from delinquent taxes and interest, The interest income line, which we indicated was a substantial increase based on the returns we're getting. Building permits, EMS revenue, town clerk revenue, other local revenue, tax relief for the elderly, and state. Board of Education, state, which was ECS, renter's rebate, which is a rebate which goes against the ECS, and then other state grants. So, with all of that said, we would have, and including the adjusted grand list, which was an increase, as mentioned, of 0.491%. We would have a projected mill rate of 31.97, which would be an increase over the prior year mill rate as it stands of 31.28, an increase of 0.69 for 2.20% mill rate increase. Mill rate equals tax increase. Sorry, I'm making that a very clear point, because I know that there's probably some talk about the budget increase, not the mill rate tax increase. And then February 20th happened. So that goes away for a while. And the proposal comes forward with the governor. And there's no change, obviously, in the budgets, but that changes our revenue. And the numbers that we have been seeing, and again, Mr. Hoey did put these on the screen, but I will recap. The ECS, Board of Education state revenue, would drop from $2,156,392 to $1,568,902, a decrease of $587,488. We would also have a contribution to the state for the teacher's pension costs, which is teacher's retirement contribution. I actually had a little statement here on what that meant, but Mr. Hoey did a fine job in explaining what that was, so I won't do that. I'll save you all that. But that's $166,052. And there's actually a slight reduction in LoSIP, a very small reduction, and that's in the other state grants, I believe. Is that the case? That's not part of, okay. All right, thank you. But it was a very small amount, but I was going to mention it anyway. So it's not part of it, so good, I don't have to mention it. That being said, we would have a total revenue reduction and or contribution of $777,264. What that does is it would have a effect of a projected mill rate of 32.22, an increase of 0.94 from 31.28, and that would be an increase mill rate / tax increase of 3.02% versus the 2.2. So that's how the numbers changed from February 7th in our presentation on the 14th and the forms and summaries we were getting to February 20th, which was the day I left for a vacation and wasn't very pleased that I left that day when I found out what I did, what I heard. And that is the base of the discussion that we will be having on Thursday night. I think it's fair to say that we have to make an estimation as far as where we think the governor's proposed budget will go based on numerous factors. Success of our past delegation, a new governor, new legislators, the climate of the state of Connecticut. That's just 4. I'm sure there's probably numerous other factors, but that will be something we'll need to discuss as far as where we think the governor's proposed budget, how much of an impact that will have, and will stay intact. And we will also need to look at, do the budget stay as is, or do we look at any cuts? Or in that case, do we look at any increases? Just because we're talking about budgets doesn't mean we have to cut them. We could also increase them. We have that ability to discuss that and see if there should be more money. I did want to just restate that at the referendum as well, there would be 2 bonded questions, one for the schools. Mary Jane?
The number of bonding questions, because we have to
We would say, okay. So there's a request for bonding. It has not gone to bond council as far as how we would put those bond resolutions together. That is something that comes after all of this, but I did want to put it on record that there's a bonding of capital projects request for the town that will be in the total amount of approximately $3.7 million. After it goes through bond council, then that number will be actualized. And on the Board of Education side, it's basically about $3 million. This thing, it's $3,004,000. It's just tad over 3. So those are the two numbers that are going to be asked for in some allocation that will be determined by bond council through bond resolutions, probably multiple. Thank you. I always have to look at Mary Jane, make sure I got it right. So, I don't believe I have anything else to raise. I don't know if the board has anything that they'd like to mention at this point.
I guess I'm just looking for one clarification from
Sure.
Board of Education on the bonding at, like you said, $3,004,498. That is a 2-year request? 1 year request.
1 year request, yeah. The town would be a 2-year request. The Board of Ed is requesting 1 year request.
That's a decision we would have to make, whether we do 2 years for both.
It's a decision we would need to make. Saying it so everyone can hear that. A lot of times they do come together, but we don't really have, I mean, it's basically up to bond council on how they determine, so.
We'll talk about it Thursday.
Anything else from the board? Okay. If there's nothing else from the Board of Finance, and I'd like to open it up to public forum. Anyone wishing to address the Board of Finance in public forum? Everyone's been really educated tonight? Okay. And although the work has been going on for all of us at this table, we now have 2 days of lots of crunching to do and lots of work. And Thursday night will be our workshop. Just to reiterate, again, we have technically 2 workshops. We typically have a workshop number 1, which would be on the Thursday following this presentation. We also have a workshop number 2 if needed. I don't think at the time I've been on the Board of Finance, I think it's happened once. Actually, no, I'm sorry. It happened last year. Don't ever plan a vacation and think that the workshop number 2 isn't going to happen because of a snowstorm. Learned my lesson on that one. So, so workshop number 2 is if needed. We have usually discussed, deliberated, and decided on what budget to send to the voters on the first workshop, and that would be 7:30 on Thursday night, right here in this room. Okay. If nothing else,
Move we adjourn.
I would like to ask for a movement to adjourn. Moved and seconded?
That was quick, wasn't it?
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Nicely done.